Hi, everyone, and welcome to Dead to Rights, the podcast. I'm your host, Donna Carrick. Before we dig into today's episode, I first want to apologize for being so late. It was supposed to be up last Sunday, but due to a lot of publishing deadlines, I just couldn't do it. But I'm thrilled to be bringing today to you an interview with author Alison Bruce. Alison is a Canadian crime writer and the author of Ghost Writer, as well as quite a number of other titles. So I'm really looking forward to sharing our interview with you. Also, today's story is going to be from EFD1 Starship Goodwords, Carrick Publishing 2012, and the story is Family Values by Sylvia Maltosh-Warsh. Before we get there, though, I just want to mention to you all a podcast that I've been thoroughly enjoying for the past year, and I've been meaning to share information with you about it. It's titled, for podcast listeners, Canadian True Crime. And it is hosted by Christy Lee, who is an Australian-born, living now in Canada, and she is an aficionado of Canadian true crime. So all of her stories are based on real Canadian cases, and her telling and her presentation is truly wonderful. Although not for young children, please, because some of these stories are quite gruesome. But if true crime is something that you enjoy as much as I do, please look up Canadian True Crime with host Christy Lee. I think you're going to get a big kick out of it. We've had a terrible week in the news. Another terrible week, I should say. I should preface that always by saying the word another. There was a shooting and 11 left dead in a synagogue in Pittsburgh, the Tree of Life Synagogue. This was a truly horrific hate crime, and it needs to be dealt with as such. I believe that the person who I shall not name, who was responsible for the shooting, has been charged with hate crimes and quite a number of other counts, and I'm hoping that he will never again see the light of day. I don't even want to talk about the perpetrator of the act because these guys go into these things for the glory, and I won't bring them that. But I encourage any of you who have not already heard the stories of the victims and their families to please research this and look up the stories and try to memorialize in your own quiet way the lives of these 11 people, because they are lives that were truly wasted. It's another episode of extreme sorrow in our Western world that really should not have happened, based only on hate. While we wait for that good news, let's focus on the craft of writing. I want to talk to you about a trick that I use when I am editing my own work. So if you are attempting to self-edit your work, in particular fiction, but this can be true of any work, great writers and great editors will tell you that the overuse of adverbs is a big no-no in writing. You may feel like, well, you want to be descriptive in your text, and that's not always a bad thing. Some truly great writers have had wonderfully descriptive passages, and we don't want our work just to be cold and cut and dried. However, most writers, in particular new writers, lean far too heavily on adjectives and adverbs. And today I want to talk to you about a little trick I use for weeding out redundant adverbs. In your Word document, use the search function. Type in the suffix ly. And just search those out. I think you're going to be just amazed at how many of those adverbs are in your first draft of your work. And getting out, I would say 90% of those, is going to help you when you approach an editor or a publisher or an agent. They're going to view your work as being a lot more professional than what you think it might be right now if you simply apply that one trick. Again, that's search for the suffix ly and eradicate as many of those redundant adverbs as you can. That's my tip for today. And now what I want to do is I want to bring you our interview with Alison Bruce. Alison writes history, mystery, and suspense. Her books combine clever mysteries, well-researched backgrounds, and a touch of romance. Her protagonists are marked by their strength of character, sense of humor, and the ability to adapt, sooner or later, to new situations. 4 of her novels have been finalists for genre awards. She is a copywriter, an editor, a graphic designer since 1992. She's also been a comic book store manager, a small press publisher, and a web designer. Currently, she is the executive director of Crime Writers of Canada. And I've known Alison for many years through the CWC. Her titles include Hazardous Unions, A Bodyguard to Remember, Deadly Season, Under a Texas Star, Deadly Legacy, and her latest, Ghost Writer, which is the one that I'll be talking with her about today. So without further ado, please give a great big welcome to Alison E. Bruce.
Good morning.
Good morning, Alison. Welcome to Dead to Rights. How are you today?
I'm fine, thanks. And
Good.
yourself?
Good. And how is everything in your neck of the woods? You're located in, I think, are you in Hamilton area?
No, I'm in Guelph.
You're in Guelph. Okay.
I'm in
I wanted to
Guelph,
say
yeah.
Guelph to start with. I don't know why I got thrown off on that.
Well, we're more into the snow belt than you are. Just on the edge of it.
Okay. We're going to air this episode on October 28th, but I'll let our listeners in on a little secret. We're actually recording on April 21st, and we've got snow on April 21st, and I am so annoyed.
Me too. And annoyed is exactly how I describe it. How dare you?
I don't think we're alone, Alison. I really don't think we're alone on that. Now, you've been writing for a really long time. Can you tell our listeners when you started writing novels?
Oh, now writing novels, that would be my late teens.
Okay.
I started my first novel, I suppose, when I was at Ryerson, just before, actually. And I was a terrible student there, just terrible. I got into the program because I thought I could, for some reason, I thought I could slide from home ec into journalism after the first year. Okay, so in my more boring classes, I developed the talent for looking like I was taking notes, but actually working on my novel in longhand. I had my comeuppance though, because I even wrote on my lap when I was in the washroom, and I accidentally left my clipboard there. And when I went back, it was gone.
Oh.
And I never saw that story, never saw the light of day.
Oh.
But honestly, I did not flush it. It wasn't that bad. Well, it probably wasn't that bad. It was my first novel, for heaven's sake.
So this was in the days before tweeting in the John. You were actually writing in the John.
Oh, yes.
I like that. I wonder if anyone else was writing in the John in the days before Twitter. That's funny. So tell us about some of your early titles.
It used to. Now, are you talking about the published ones or the
Published
ones
or unpublished or both? Actually, I'm interested in both because I know that for many professional writers like ourselves, and for anyone who doesn't know it, Alison Bruce is a professional writer and a member of the Crime Writers of Canada and the backbone of the Crime Writers of Canada. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more too. But for most professional writers, our early work never does see the light of day. So if you're a new writer and you're thinking that your first manuscript is just going to be such a huge hit and it's going to carry you to the end of days, well, that might be, but it sure isn't for most of us. So yes, Alison, please tell me about a couple of the unpublished and then a couple of your published early titles.
Okay, well, to start off with, I wrote in a completely different genre. I started in my teens. I was much more interested in science fiction than mystery, although I've been reading mystery almost since I could read adult books, which was at about age 12. Anyway, so I was writing what I liked, which is true now. But then I was really into science fiction, and I was into Star Trek. I, for some reason, thought maybe I could be one of those unique few, that small group that actually got published in a field that everybody who is a Star Trek fan wants to get published in. So I tried that out. I was not successful, and I switched to copywriting and writing professionally, but writing for business and education. I kept writing stories, but I didn't write my next novel until I was in hospital for surgery. And I had a terrible roommate, very talkative, and I needed something to bury myself in so it looked like I was busy. And I started writing the book that would become Under a Texas Star, which was my first published novel. And it went through many transitions, and many transitions in 2 decades before it got published. And a part of that was because of technology. When I finally did get it onto a computer, I got it onto a Commodore Plus 4, and I couldn't get it off again because it became a defunct machine. Part of it, of course, is that I started having family, and taking care of the family got to be the highest priority. But that was the first novel I had. I eventually did get it polished up to the point where that was my first novel.
And that was Under a Texas Star, and that is a great book. And listeners, you can find that on Amazon for sure, as well as at other retailers. I only mention Amazon not because I prefer them, but because, hey, it is the starting point. Let's be realistic. So if you find it there and you know what you're looking for, feel free to buy it anywhere. It doesn't have to be purchased from Amazon. And it's a great book, and it's a sort of I would classify it as a Western mystery. Would you?
Oh, absolutely. It was a Western. I was, at that point, I was going through my Western phase. I have a tendency to binge on different genres of books. And when I went into hospital, I was binging on Westerns. So I wrote a Western. And it's the only Western as such I've ever written. I have written a novella, which is set in the American Civil War. And I kind of did that on demand, which was so nice. For an author who has been struggling for decades to get published, okay, on and off, because I also had to make a living and take care of my family, but still, decades, to have somebody turn around and say, can you write a novella for us? We want to publish it.
Wow. That is really pretty
terrific.
Cool.
That was really great. So I wrote that. There was actually 2 novellas in the book, and that was Hazardous Unions. And I did that with Kat Flannery, who is a fellow author with Imagine Books, which is my first publisher. And they are very nice stories. But we were a little bit ahead of the novella craze, so it's not the best-selling book I ever did.
Novellas happen to be really popular right now, and a lot of people have theorized that it's due to shorter attention spans, people on the run, and there's probably some truth to that. I mean, if you can get your teeth into something where the story moves right along and comes to a satisfying conclusion fairly quickly, then you can make time to read. But the biggest complaint I hear from adults is that they just don't have the time to read that they used to have.
I think that is true. There is definitely truth there. But novellas were very popular earlier. One of the big reasons they went out of fashion is because print magazines, fewer and fewer of them were doing stories. You had your dedicated ones, like I was just about to say the science fiction one, but Alfred Hitchcock, Mystery Magazine, and that type. And you've got, now we have online magazines that can do it.
Yeah.
But mostly magazines make their money from advertising, not sales. So advertising took the place of where those short stories went.
Right.
I grew up on reading short stories in magazines. I had a friend of my mother's used to get Women's Weekly, and she passed them on to me, and that's the only romance I ever read was in there. But you don't get that. Those venues aren't around. And printing novellas is almost as expensive as printing a full-length novel.
Yeah.
So it's not popular unless it goes into an anthology. Now with e-publishing, doing a novella makes a lot more sense. And because even the print books are done on demand, so there's not this, you don't have to sell thousands of them.
Right.
You can sell thousands of them as an ebook, but as picking them up, you don't have to do that because it's on demand. And if you look at the prices of the paperbacks, there's not a lot of difference between picking up a novella and picking up a full-length novel.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Yeah.
And that reflects the fact that it's that close in what it takes to.
Well, the platforms have certainly had a huge bearing on what we produce as writers and how we produce it. The advent of e-publishing has been a phenomenal breakthrough, and what it's meant is what used to be a sweeping epic saga is now 3 novellas. If you take a look at works like The Hunger Games, which I absolutely adored. I mean, I suppose there's love it or hate it people out there, but I adored it and my daughter adored it. We could not get enough of it, and we were really sorry when it was finished. But again, that would have been one sweeping novel in the old days, and we would have loved it and we would have hated for it to end. And instead it's 3 novellas, which is fine. I mean, it's certainly legitimate,
And one of the reasons for that was that because there were magazines who would serialize it.
Yeah.
Dickens, most of his epic novels started off being serialized.
Yes.
And of course being paid by the word, which is why they're so epic in length.
And I have to tell our listeners that if I had to choose only one author who has influenced me and who I have loved from the time I could read, it's Dickens. So and he did. He started out as a serial writer, and he was a flawed human being, but he was such a writer. My goodness.
It's true. And in fact, it took until I think J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series before he was ever outsold.
Oh wow, that's quite a run.
I think so. Well, Terry Pratchett might have outsold him, but he would draw large audiences. There's a lot that we do now that they were doing. They were doing back then. Dickens went on book tours. He would read his books aloud, and he'd get huge audiences for it. And that's something they have, most authors don't get unless they're really famous.
Yeah.
But we all do it.
Yeah.
It's part of what we do.
That's right.
That part, there's a new form to things, but what we have to do as authors hasn't changed that much in the meat of it.
No, it really is just trying new things, using new platforms, using new technologies, trying new things, trying new methodologies, but the end art hasn't changed that much. It's the art of the word. And getting to that, you belong to a group called the Deadly Dames. I want to get to your work with the CWC, but can you first tell me a little bit briefly about your association with the Deadly Dames and how that has worked for you and what you do with them?
Well, we started off as a writers group, and it's the first writers group I ever belonged to that I didn't have to quit because of family illness, so I'm very fond of it for that. It's very true that when you are starting off, especially, you want other people to read your work and have with a critical eye, but with constructive criticism. And that's tough, to get that group where, you don't have egos involved. And that's what I found with Deadly Dames. We read out our work. We're all professional authors. We're all either award winners or have been nominated for awards. But we still have that same need to get feedback as we're writing to make sure what we're writing is good enough to get printed. And it reflects who we are, and it coherent. So that's how we started. But we all had to do we all have to do our self-promotion, and we decided to do it together. And that has been brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Because it's so awkward sitting at a table in a bookstore all by yourself, hoping that somebody will come by. But you sit up at a table with 3 to 4 other authors, and you draw an audience.
Yes, and you're a merry band of sisters, and people are drawn to fun. They're drawn to laughter. They're drawn to good conversation. And when you're what I would call a merry band of sisters together, I think that does draw people, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It really does. We get gigs at libraries more often because we suit what they need to do. Really, you're only going to show up as a single author at a library if you're, Louise Penny.
Yes. If you're a top name,
in the high caliber.
Yeah.
You get a larger draw. There's enough variety. We all write crime fiction. We're actually all members of Crime Writers of Canada. That's how we met. And but we all write slightly different genres within it. And so we cover spectrum.
Okay.
And so we can compare, and we can, if somebody comes to us and they're not really big into the cozy mysteries, well, they know that they have the whodunit and the suspense and the caper there as well to listen to.
Yes, and I know who you're referring to with each of those subgenres. But for the sake of our listeners, can you name some of your fellow dames?
Oh, of course. Well, for the capers, Melody Campbell, who writes the Goddaughter series, and is definitely an award winner with that. The cozies, Janet Boland, who is now known as Ginger Bolton, because in the cozy industry, they love you to change your name. Different author for different series, even if it's the same author writing it. And our suspense writer is Catherine Astolfo, who is, by the way, is up for a Arthur Ellis Award for
She certainly is. She certainly is. And again, I remind our listeners that we're actually recording in April of 2018, and the awards gala for the Arthur Ellis Awards is going to be May 24th, which won't mean anything to you when this airs in October, except that, yes, Catherine Astolfo has been nominated for her story, The Outlier, which appeared in 13 Claws, which was brought to you by Carrick Publishing. So that's my little boast fest. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I know you've got another person to name, so I'm going to let you go ahead and do that.
Sorry, now I've gone blank. There's myself, and I write whodunits mostly, but across, as you can see, I mean, I have a Western mystery. I have a detective mystery, and with Ghostwriter, I have a paranormal suspense mystery, and so that's quite a variety. But they're all in that whodunit frame. And then we have, how can I do this? Joan O'Callahan.
Yes.
Who is also another short story writer, and also award-winning nonfiction author. She is a teacher's teacher by profession. She works for Teachers College.
That's right.
And,
she teaches at OAZ, and she is responsible for the excellent quality of teachers who come out of our Ontario schools. And so that segues into, because you are all CWC members, you're all members of the Crime Writers of Canada. But Alison, you've also worked for years with the Crime Writers of Canada as pretty much their administrative backbone and their online persona. Can you tell us about that work and what your association with the CWC has meant to you and brought to you and how it has enhanced your writing?
Well, first off, I would never have found my first publisher without CWC. My first publisher, Cheryl K. Tardif, was also a member. She's also a self-published author, and she decided to go into business as a publisher herself, a story you are probably quite familiar with. And, she started Imagine Books, and I met her before I was her first author on the string, because we met through CWC. And her first few authors were actually from CWC because these are authors she knew, and she knew the work of. I started work. I was invited to join the board, and then there was a need for somebody other than the executive director, because the organization was growing, somebody who could take care of the management of publications. CWC produces something like 25 publications a year.
Wow.
We produced Crime Beat, our public newsletter, 10 times a year. Crime Time, our members-only newsletter, comes out 10 times a year. And then there's, it's more like 25, 26. Cool Canadian Crime is kind of it used to be an annual, now it's an annual, which is updated quarterly, so it comes out 4 times a year. And that promotes our members' books that come out in that calendar year. And then, of course, there's the annual report and a bunch of other, our annual poster, quite a few things. And it's just impossible for one person to do everything, although for years, Cheryl Friedman was that one person who was doing everything.
Yes, I know. My mind goes right there too. And if there is one person who can be the one person in any organization, it really is Cheryl. But the thing was, it was a much smaller pond at that time. And that's not to take anything from Cheryl, because everything it is and will become really springboarded off of Cheryl. I can't overstate that. But it outgrew itself, didn't it, Alison?
It very much did. Face it, CWC started with a group of authors meeting in a bar and saying, let's be associated. In a lot of ways, it had bore more resemblance to the Deadly Dames than it does to the organization it became. Because they would get together monthly, they might get a speaker, they might, they'd talk about their work. But from there, it grew into a national organization. And there came a tipping point when one staff member, for a long time, they didn't even have a staff member, it only had volunteers. It reached its tipping point where it needed a staff member, and that was Cheryl. And then when Cheryl was forced by ill health to retire, or at least for a little while, because she's back doing all kinds of stuff now, she ended up, one person, it turned out, couldn't replace her. And so eventually 2 people did, and that was Melanie Campbell as executive director and myself as publication coordinator.
And
so
I know full well from my years.
job.
I know full well from my years on the board that things don't run without you, Alison. So kudos to you. You do a great job, and I don't know how often it's stated, but it needs to be stated clearly. You do a wonderful job for the association, and it is for our listeners out there. If you're a crime writer, you consider yourself a crime writer, whether you're published or not, you should become a member of the Crime Writers of Canada if you're located in Canada, because this is our professional organization. It is the professional organization. You can join up as a professional author member, or you can join up as an associate member if you're not yet published. So there's the 2 tiers of association, and you should belong. You really should. I can't state that enough.
Since you stated it, I don't have to. This is wonderful.
There you go. Me and my big mouth. I want to talk to you before we wrap up about your latest book, Ghostwriter, because it looks fabulous. I bought a copy. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but it looks absolutely fabulous. Tell us a little bit about it.
This is where I'm kind of coming back to my roots with this, because this a type of story that I have loved all my life. Excuse me. It involves the mystery. It involves some romance, but I've always liked ghost stories, and this one definitely involved it. In fact, there are some autobiographical parts to the book when it with ghosts. One part is in the introduction where Jen Kirby sees her grandmother when she's very young as a ghost when her grandmother dies. And that happened to me when I was 6 years old. I saw my grandmother visited me and said goodbye. And I found out the next day that she had died overnight. Now, I'm enough of a skeptic that I'm willing to believe that it wasn't really a ghost. It could have been me hearing things that were going on in the house and then interpreting into a dream. But it felt like a ghost. And so I think that's what started my interest in it. And also why I find ghost stories like the Ghost in Mrs. Muir and that kind of ghost stories where it's not meant to horrify, but the ghost is another character in the story.
Yes, more of a gentle presence, or a friendly presence, or sometimes even an accidental presence, a presence that doesn't know what it is, as in, what was the title of I See Dead People? You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, Sixth Sense.
Sixth Sense, thank you,
Yes.
which was an oddly beautiful movie in a strange way. I mean, it was sometimes horrific, sometimes violent, but, and I don't believe in spoilers even in an old movie. So if anyone hasn't seen it, I'm not going to give away the ending, but it was definitely an unusual story and told in an unusual manner. But yes, I think about the ghost, and is it The Ghost of Mrs. Miller? Is that the proper title?
The Ghost of Mrs. Muir.
Mrs. Muir. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. The Ghost of Mrs. Muir. And that actually had a profound influence on me too. The original movie, because the story goes at the end, he takes away her memory of him so that she can live in the real world without being haunted by him. And she doesn't reunite and remember him until she dies. I hated that. I hate the idea of somebody taking your memories away.
Yes.
I think your memories are what make you who you are.
Yeah.
And so when I was writing early ghost fiction, I would actually I wrote a lot of fan fiction when I was at university because that's all I had time for. And it's like you have ready-made characters, and you get to do with them what you want to do with them instead of what they've handed to you. And one of the things I would always do is correct the things that I thought they made a mistake about. And one of those things was that idea of taking away somebody's memories because it would make their life easier.
Yeah, there's a Jim Carrey movie, The Eternal Sunshine of the... Oh gosh, I can't come up with the full title. I'm really drawing blanks today. Sorry, Alison.
Yeah.
But I think it's called something along the lines of
I
know the first three words are correct, so I'm sure our listeners can Google it. The Eternal Sunshine of the Uncluttered Mind, I'm going to say, although I know that uncluttered is not the right word. All the other words there are correct, and it's Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
And it's not a ghost story, but yes, it ties into what you're talking about having your memories taken away. And, no, it's horrific. It's one of the worst horrors you can imagine because we all have to consider when we're old and alone. What do we have? We have our memories, and if they're good memories, they can really carry you.
That's true. It's very true. And memory is a very important part of a ghostwriter because it's not like Jen's interaction with ghosts is not like, say, for instance, Ghost Whisperer, where they talk to her and present their mystery and tell her to solve them, basically. She sees the memories of ghosts. That's what she sees most clearly. Later she gets a bit more developed where she can interact with the ghosts that are actually there, but for the most part, she sees the ghosts and she sees their memories of what was going on. And it turns out that ghosts are aren't any better witnesses than the living when it comes to solving a crime. So it takes time. It starts off with a little conceit, a bit of myself into it too. I've done a lot of ghostwriting, mostly nonfiction and mostly for education.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made Jen Kirby a ghostwriter, and I gave her the reason she goes on this expedition to the Arctic is because she's made an offer she can't refuse.
Oh.
Named credit on the book.
Okay.
Something every ghostwriter wants.
Mm-hmm.
To be actually out there and people know that it's your work that they're reading.
Mm-hmm.
So she goes on this with a client friend on this expedition to find out what happened to a submarine, which has been discovered thanks to the melting of the ice cap and satellite photography in Canadian Arctic waters.
Mm-hmm.
So she has to have they go on this expedition. It involves family members of the crew. The submarine went missing during the Cold War, so these are adults who were kids when they lost their parents or family. And she needs the permission of the Canadian government and, of course, the American government because it's an American vessel. So you have a U.S. Navy nuclear submarine on the scene. You have a Canadian frigate. And you have this expedition boat, which would be a nice size if you didn't see it beside these two behemoths.
Mm-hmm.
And they go to they go to raise the submarine station and find out what happened. She starts seeing ghosts, and she hasn't seen them since she was a child, but she's seeing them again.
Mm-hmm.
And when she gets trapped, when an explosion happens and she gets trapped on the submarine for a while, she starts actually actively looking for these to see, for one thing, to keep her company. She's all alone in the dark. So she starts seeing their memories. And from there, she has this drive that's more than, this is a job to solve this mystery. As it turns out, not all of the dead want the mystery to be solved. And there's a lot of the living that don't want the truth to come out because there's some awkward political parts to it since it happened during the Cold War. What they were doing up there in the first place.
Right.
And in Canadian waters, not international waters.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it progresses. So there's the suspense and mystery and the characters who are working with her and against her, and sometimes it's hard to tell which one they are in real life. And then she has that same thing, that same dynamic going on with the ghosts. One of those crew members is the one who's responsible for the deaths.
Okay. Well, that sounds really fascinating. So, in effect, she's really ghostwriting for the ghosts, is she?
In a way, yes.
Yeah, so she's
because
channeling their
the ones
stories.
who were actually killed want the mystery solved. They're not even sure of exactly what happened because each one of them sees different parts. Mm-hmm. And as the story progresses, we in the living world, as it were, evidence, hard forensic evidence comes up to support things. But in the ghost's memory, the story builds as she starts to put together the perceptions of the different crew members.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love this concept because it really is traditional detective work where you're interviewing all these various players and each one sees the event from a different point of view. And when you piece them all together, you get some Frankenstein understanding of what actually happened.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly it. Mm-hmm. And which is one of the kind of mysteries, by the way, that I've always enjoyed.
Same here.
Different points of view of people.
Yes, except in this case, the people are dead.
To find out what the reality is.
Yeah, I really love the concept. I mean, as a writer, And as somebody who is fascinated with literary works, I love concepts that are just a little quirky, just a little different, and have some meat. Like, it's fine, anybody can come up with a great, exciting concept, but it has to have some meat to carry it, and I love that. It's really, really very good. Anyways, Alison, I thank you for coming on Dead to Rights, and I hope you're going to stay on the line for a moment after I turn off the sound here. I really enjoyed having you on and talking about your work with the CWC and your new book, Ghostwriter, which everybody should look for, please. It's a terrific book by Alison Bruce.
Thank you so much, Donna.
I want to thank Alison Bruce for joining us today on Dead to Rights, the podcast. And I know that you will have enjoyed her interview as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. Our short story for today is Family Values by Sylvia Maltosh-Warsh from EFD1, Starship Goodwords, Carrick Publishing, 2012. Sylvia was born in Germany and came to Canada when she was 4 years old. She earned a BA and a master's in linguistics from the University of Toronto. Her short stories and poetry have appeared in Canada and the U.S. Sylvia is the author of the Rebecca Temple Mystery Series published by Dundurn. To Die in Spring, 2000, was nominated for an Ellis Award for Best First Novel. Find Me Again, 2003, won an Edgar Award from Mystery Writers of America and was nominated for 2 Anthonys. Season of Iron, 2006, was shortlisted for a Relit Award, and The Queen of Unforgetting, published in 2010, was chosen for a plaque by Project Bookmark Canada. Best Girl, a Rapid Reads book, came out in 2012. Sylvia lives in Toronto, where she teaches writing to seniors. Family Values by Sylvia Maltosh-Warsh. He was an 80-year-old horror, thought Libby, stirring the tomato sauce on the stovetop. Still lived in that ancient house, a wretched old man who hated everyone. He should have been the one to lose his memory and forget their only child, not Mama, who loved her, who always took her side and protected her from his rages, who lately peered at her, trying to excavate some memory of her daughter from an unyielding mind. Mama's old age pension barely covered the bed in the short-staffed nursing home. She shared a cramped room with 3 other crazy women, one who screamed day and night. Libby had asked about the price of a private room. Well beyond her office administrator's salary, it turned out. And how long would that job last now that she had let herself go, hair unkempt, clothes haphazard? She carefully steamed the cabbage leaves in the pot. The home said her mother was agitated all day until Libby arrived after work. No wonder. By the time she got there, Mama's diaper was soiled and she was starving. Libby was exhausted, going daily. Her father never visited. The home suggested she pay a caregiver to be with Mama while she was at work. But that took money. The house would bring in money, yet her father would never agree to sell. And he could be around for another 20 years, still tall and strong for 80. Anger kept him going. While she was at home, he had slapped her regularly. She was a pile of crap, he said. Why couldn't he have a son? She hadn't spoken to him in months. The last time she phoned, he cursed her and hung up. Maybe she could convince him to sell. Fat chance. But he did have a soft spot. One evening she arrived at his door carrying a warm foil-covered pan. "Get the hell out of here," he yelled behind the closed door. "I brought you something. Cabbage rolls." He hated to cook, loathed Meals on Wheels. Cabbage rolls were his favorite. He opened the door, squinting at her with disgust. "How do I know you didn't poison 'em?" "I'll have some too," she said. He let her in. He looked thinner, a bit stooped, still a head taller than her, a force to be reckoned with. In the kitchen, she served the rolls. He sat down and started to eat, ignoring her. "I want to sell the house," she said. He stopped chewing. "Did your mother send you?" "Yes, she wants you to sell." Libby avoided his eyes. "She was always a crazy bitch. Tell her to go to hell." He pointed at her plate. "You're not eating." She took a bite to reassure him. He resumed eating. She rose quietly as if going to the counter. Instead, she stopped behind him. He would never change, just grow meaner with age, crueler. She took the clear plastic bag from her pocket. Holding her breath, she flung the bag over his head and pressed it against his face. He screamed, outraged, clawing at the bag. He was half choking, half coughing. She held the bag tight, hardened by the memory of his hand on her face, the burden of his insults. Unexpectedly, he swung his elbow back and jabbed her in the stomach. The pain almost made her let go of the bag, but she thought of her darling mother and held on till the plastic filled all the crevices of his face.
Let it rot.
And that has been Family Values by Sylvia Maltash-Warsh. I want to thank Sylvia for this wonderful story that was featured in EFD1 Starship Goodwords 2012 Carrick Publishing. Are you a published author? Would you like to be profiled on Dead to Rights, the podcast? We're now open for slots to fill in 2019. We'd love to hear from you at carrickpublishing@rogers.com, and be sure to say Dead to Rights interview in the subject line. Do you have a question for any of our featured authors regarding the book business or writing tips? Do you have a theme or a topic you'd like us to address? We'd love to hear from readers and writers alike, and you can touch base with us at deadtorights.ca, on Facebook under Dead to Rights, or on Twitter at Dead to Rights Pod. Of course, you can always find me, Donna Carrick, on Facebook, under my personal page or as Carrick Publishing. We're also tweetable at Donna_Carrick, at Alex_Carrick, or at Carrick Pub. If you have questions related to the book industry for any of our authors, don't hesitate to reach out through our online forums. All of our music for Dead to Rights, including the theme song Eyes of Gold, have been composed and performed by Ted Carrick. Be sure to join us next week when we bring you a real treat, an interview with Joseph Glasner. And that's something that you'll really be looking forward to, because Joseph is a very interesting gentleman indeed. So have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
A dusty road, man alone. His vital signs go on hold. And I don't know what you've been told, but the years have turned my eyes gold. And I told you what you told me, we'd never be in the same boat for free. Yet it rides, let it rot.